I still remember the exact weight of that silence. The kind of silence that fills a room right before something breaks. I'm sitting across from Richard Harmon, my hands resting flat on my knees, trying to look like my heart isn't hammering against my ribs. His desk is all glass and chrome, cold and sharp, the kind of desk a man buys when he wants you to feel small sitting in front of it. He's sliding a piece of paper toward me, slowly, deliberately, the way a cat pushes something off a shelf just to watch it fall. It's my annual review. 17 years. 17 years I've been walking through that front door. 17 years of early mornings and late nights and weekends that disappeared into work calls and client emergencies. 17 years of believing that if you showed up, if you gave everything you had, it would mean something. And now here's this piece of paper. Richard leans back in his executive chair, and he's got this look on his face. You know the one. That half smile that isn't really a smile at all. The look of a man who's been waiting to say something, who's been rehearsing it, who's enjoying the moment far more than any decent human being should. He says it slowly. We're cutting your salary in half. Take it or leave it. The number on that paper is $85,000, down from $170,000. After 17 years of building this company's entire Midwest operation from the ground up, with my bare hands, with my reputation, with pieces of my life I'll never get back. I look up at him, and he's actually smirking. Oh, and before I go any further, please like this video and listen to my story till the end. And let me know which city you're listening from in the comments. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Because I think what happened to me, what I did next, and what I learned on the other side of the worst day of my career, it might be exactly what someone out there needs to hear right now. My name is Daniel Holt. I'm 51 years old, and the man sitting across that desk from me had absolutely no idea that the thing he thought was going to break me had actually just set me free. 17 years of 60-hour weeks. 17 years of driving through snowstorms, through ice, through the kind of Midwest winters that crack the ground open, just to show up for clients face-to-face when everyone else was sending emails. 17 years of staying up until 2 a.m. coordinating emergency repairs so that a plant manager 3 states away could walk into work the next morning and find everything running. I understand, I said, and my voice was steady. I surprised even myself. What does this take effect? His smirk got wider, like he'd won something. Immediately, he said. I nodded. I reached into my pocket, and I checked my watch. The old one. The one my grandfather left me, with a worn leather strap and a scratched face that my grandmother had never let him replace, because she said it had character. I ran my thumb across the glass the way I always do when I need to feel grounded. Perfect timing, I told him, and I meant it in a way he couldn't possibly understand yet. Something flickered across Richard's face, just for a second, because that wasn't the reaction he'd been expecting. He'd expected panic. He'd expected me to fold, to negotiate, to beg. He'd spent 18 months studying spreadsheets and acquisition reports and not one single day understanding what actually made this company run. What Richard Harmon didn't know, sitting in that chair with that smirk, was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a phone call that changed the direction of my entire life. His name was Marcus Bauer. Marcus runs Bauer Industrial Systems, one of the largest German-American manufacturing support firms looking to plant serious roots in the Midwest market. We'd first met 3 years earlier at a trade conference in Chicago, both of us standing at the edge of the same exhibit, both of us bored by the same presentation. We'd ended up talking for 4 hours over bad coffee and good conversation about what this industry actually needed versus what corporate types thought it needed. He'd been watching my work ever since. Daniel, Marcus had said during our meeting at a downtown hotel 3 weeks before that salary cut, I'm not here to offer you a job. I'm here to offer you a future. I'm building something called Cornerstone Industrial Partners, and I need someone who understands that this business lives and dies on relationships, not quarterly projections. I hadn't given him an answer that day. I told him I needed time, that there was loyalty to consider, history to weigh. That 17 years was a long time, and walking away from something you'd built with your own hands wasn't simple. But sitting there, watching Richard drag a piece of paper across that cold glass desk like I was some entry-level hire he could shuffle around, watching that smirk spread across his face like he just made the most brilliant business decision of his career, something in me went completely still. Not the stillness of defeat, the stillness of clarity. Marcus's offer wasn't just an opportunity anymore. It felt like the universe had looked at the situation, looked at me, and decided that enough was enough. And if you're watching this right now, maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you're sitting somewhere listening to this, and something in your chest is recognizing it. That moment when you realize you've been pouring yourself into something that was never going to pour anything back. Hold on to that feeling, because what happened next, what I did in the days and weeks that followed, and what it cost me and what it gave me, you are not ready for where this story goes. Stay with me. Here's what you need to understand about Richard Harmon. He came in from outside. Corporate acquisition group. Bought Meridian Industrial Equipment from the founding family 20 months ago. Never worked a day in actual field sales. Never had to explain to a production manager why his assembly line was bleeding money because a single piece of equipment had failed and the wrong part had been ordered. Never sat on the phone at midnight with a maintenance crew walking them through an emergency repair protocol because the morning shift couldn't afford another delay. He bought a company the way some people buy a house they've never actually lived in. He saw the numbers. He saw the structure. He looked at the organizational chart, and he saw positions and titles and salary lines. He never saw me. Not really. Not what I actually was to that company. Officially, my title was Senior Regional Director. That's what it said on my business card, on my email signature in the company directory. But practically, functionally, in every way that actually mattered to the health and survival of Meridian Industrial Equipment, I was the foundation. I was the load-bearing wall that nobody had ever bothered to mark on the blueprint. Let me tell you about the accounts. Thomas Wheeler runs Wheeler Manufacturing, one of our biggest clients, a third-generation family operation that makes precision components for the aerospace industry. Thomas doesn't call the main line when he has a problem. Thomas calls my personal cell. Has for 11 years. When his facility was planning a major expansion 2 years ago, I was the first person he brought into the conversation, before his own board, before his contractors, before anyone. Because he trusted my judgment. Because I'd never once told him what he wanted to hear if it wasn't true. Then there's Summit Automotive. I've been their primary equipment contact for 9 years. I know the plant manager's daughter just started college. I know his father passed away last spring, and that during the funeral week, when something went down on the production floor, I personally called in every favor I had to get replacement parts expedited so his team could handle it without waking him. He didn't ask me to do that. He didn't even know I'd done it until 2 weeks later. That's the kind of thing that doesn't show up in a spreadsheet. That's the kind of thing you can't put a line item next to. But that's the fabric of what a real client relationship actually is. It's not a contract. It's not a renewal meeting. It's 9 years of showing up over and over in the moments that actually count. This pattern existed across my entire client portfolio. 48 major accounts. And in 48 cases, the relationship that kept those accounts loyal to Meridian ran directly through me. Not because I've been playing politics or deliberately positioning myself, but because I'd spent 17 years actually caring about what happened to these people's operations, and they knew it, and they remembered it every single time someone else let them down. But here's the part that really made Richard vulnerable without him ever suspecting it. The distributor network. When a client needed emergency equipment, I called Frank Delgado at Central Industrial Supply directly. Frank picked up on the first ring for me because he knew I'd never waste his time. When we needed specialized installation services, Victor Ruiz knew my voice, and he moved things to the front of the line because he knew I'd return the favor and because I'd sent business his way 3 separate times when I didn't have to. When parts went missing or delivery timelines collapsed. Robert Shaw called me specifically because he knew I understood the technical requirements and he knew I would level with him. These weren't contacts in a database. These were human beings I had real history with. Trust that had been built slowly, carefully, through years of consistent behavior. While Richard was attending industry networking events and handing out business cards that nobody kept, I was the person actually holding the operational architecture of his company together. And even his own staff, the engineers, the project coordinators, the younger sales reps, they came to me. When specifications were confusing, They knocked on my door. When timelines were impossible, they asked if I could help. When they were frustrated or scared or uncertain, I was the one who steadied them. Not because I was their supervisor, because I was the person in that building who actually solved problems instead of redirecting them. The week after my conversation with Richard, I started paying very close attention. I mapped it out, quietly, carefully. I was the primary contact on 86% of active accounts. My personal cell was the number saved in most clients' phones. Every major referral in the past 4 years had come through a relationship I had personally built. Remove me from the equation, and you weren't just losing a senior director. You were pulling the keystone out of an arch. And Richard Harmon, sitting in his glass and chrome office making salary decisions to teach people their place, had never once looked up long enough to notice. That Thursday, the day of my annual review, I walked back to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed 11 words to Marcus Bauer. I accept your partnership offer. When would you like me to start? His response came back in 40 minutes. How about Monday? It was Thursday afternoon. I submitted my formal resignation to HR before 5 o'clock. 2 weeks' notice, as required. Professional, clean, no drama. I wasn't leaving to burn anything down. I was leaving because I finally understood what I was worth, and I was finally willing to act like it. Richard barely looked up from his screen when I told him. Fine, he said. We'll manage without you. And sitting there, watching him wave me off like I was a minor inconvenience, I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, not satisfaction, something quieter than both of those. Something that felt a little like relief. Because I already knew what he didn't. I already knew that you cannot manage without something you've never actually managed at all. You can only pretend to manage it for as long as the person who's actually doing it allows you to pretend. And I was done allowing it. Stay with me, because the next 2 weeks, my last 2 weeks inside that building, and what started happening the moment I walked out the door, that's when this story gets painful. And I mean painful in a way I wasn't prepared for either. I spent those 2 weeks being, and I say this without a trace of bitterness, the most thorough and conscientious departing employee that building had ever seen. I documented everything. Every active project, every pending order, every timeline, every client preference, every technical specification for every major account. I built detailed profiles with contact names and communication histories and maintenance schedules. I wrote guides for managing each major distributor relationship. I organized my files into a structure so clear that anyone with basic competence could open it and understand exactly where things stood. I did this not because I owed it to Richard. I did it because those clients deserve continuity. Because those engineers who were going to be left holding everything deserved whatever help I could give them before I walked out. Because my name was on 17 years of work in that building, and I wanted everything I left behind to reflect what kind of person I actually was. What I couldn't document, what no file system or handover guide could ever capture, was the trust. You cannot transfer trust. You can write Thomas Wheeler's name in a client profile. You can note that he prefers morning calls and that he's allergic to corporate jargon. You can record his facility's maintenance schedule and equipment history down to the last bolt. But you cannot write down the 11 years of showing up. You cannot document the 3 times I drove 6 hours in ice storms because he needed someone on the ground and I wasn't going to let him down. You cannot create a file that explains why. When Thomas Wheeler has a problem at 2 in the morning, it was my number he reached for, not the company's general line. That kind of thing lives in a person. It moves when the person moves. It doesn't stay behind in a folder. On my last day, I arrived early, as I always had. I cleaned out my desk methodically, taking only what was mine. The photo of my daughter Emma at her high school graduation, that picture she hated because she said her hair looked wrong, but that I'd kept on my desk for 3 years because I was so proud of her I couldn't stand it. My grandfather's pocket watch that I kept in my top drawer on long days when I needed something solid to hold. My technical certifications, framed, earned across 17 years of staying current in a field that never stops changing. I left everything else. Every file, every business record, every contact sheet. All of it belonged to the company and all of it stayed. I said goodbye to the engineers one by one. Some of them had worked alongside me for a decade. Some of them were younger, people I'd mentored through their first major client crises, people who'd come to my door confused and left with a plan. A couple of them couldn't quite look me in the eye at the end. One of them, Kevin, who'd been with us for 6 years and was one of the sharpest technical minds I'd ever worked with, shook my hand and held it a little longer than he needed to. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," he said. I told him the same thing, and I meant it with everything I had. I walked out at 5 o'clock on a Friday. The parking lot was half empty. The sky was that particular shade of gray-orange that only happens in the Midwest in late October, when the light gives up before the day is really finished. I sat in my car for a few minutes. Just sat there. 17 years. Then I turned the key and drove home. Monday morning, I walked into Cornerstone Industrial Partners' temporary office space downtown, shook Marcus Bauer's hand, and started building something new. By Tuesday, my old work phone was deactivated. By Wednesday, the call started. Thomas Wheeler called Meridian's main line asking for me. The receptionist, following whatever instructions Richard had given, transferred him to Richard himself. Thomas, a man who'd been running a manufacturing operation for 22 years and did not suffer confusion gladly, found himself on the phone with someone who didn't know what project he was calling about, didn't know what equipment configuration his facility ran, and couldn't answer a single one of his questions. Thomas hung up and called Frank Delgado to ask if he knew what was going on at Meridian. Victor Ruiz called Thursday about a custom installation timeline that I had been coordinating for 6 weeks. Richard took the call personally. Within 10 minutes, it was clear to Victor that the man on the other end of the phone did not understand the technical requirements of the project. Victor asked to speak with someone who did. There wasn't anyone. By Friday of that first week, 7 major clients had called with technical questions and received answers that ranged from vague to actively incorrect. 3 distributors had inquiries about delayed shipments that normally I would have resolved before they became calls at all. An installation crew showed up at a job site for work that Richard had apparently forgotten was scheduled. I know all of this because people called me. Not to complain exactly, but because they were confused and they were worried and they'd spent years learning that if something felt wrong, Daniel Holt was the person who would tell them honestly what was happening and help them figure out what to do about it. Thomas Wheeler tracked down my new number through a mutual contact and called to congratulate me on the move. "Daniel," he said, and his voice was warm, but underneath it was something troubled. "I don't know what's happening over there, but it's like they forgot how to be a company. Nobody there seems to know anything about our operation anymore." I listened. I didn't offer explanations, didn't editorialize, didn't say a word against Richard or Meridian. What was I supposed to say? That the man who'd been signing the paychecks had never actually understood where the value came from? That the whole operation had been a kind of extended magic trick where the real work was always happening just out of frame? Instead, I said, "Thomas, if you ever want to have a conversation about what Cornerstone can offer, I'd welcome that." He said, "I think that conversation is going to happen sooner than you think." The second week, Richard apparently made things worse by having an argument with Frank Delgado over a payment dispute, accusing Frank of being unreasonable, dismissing the concern with a particular brand of corporate condescension that MBA programs seem to produce without ever teaching people when not to deploy it. Frank called me that afternoon. "Daniel," he said, "I've worked with Meridian for 9 years. I've never once been spoken to like that. If that's the direction things are going, we need to reconsider where we put our energy." That I kept my voice level. "Frank, that's a conversation for you and them to have. But I'll say this. Marcus and I are looking for distribution partners who value long-term relationships over short-term leverage. If you're interested, let's have coffee." He was very interested. And if you're still with me, if you're listening to this from wherever you are in the world, I need you to know something before we get to what happened next. That I didn't plan this. I didn't engineer any of it. I didn't sit at a desk somewhere drawing up a strategy to take down a company or settle a score. I just stopped. I stopped being the invisible support structure for someone who'd treated my 17 years like a bargaining chip. What happened after that wasn't revenge. It was physics. When you remove the foundation from a building that never knew it had one, what happens next is inevitable. The calls kept coming. Not all at once. Not dramatically. They came the way water comes through a cracked wall, slowly at first, then steady, then suddenly everywhere. Robert Shaw called about a production crisis at one of Meridian's accounts, a situation that I would normally have resolved with 3 phone calls before lunch. He'd spent 2 days trying to get someone at Meridian to understand the scope of the problem. He'd been transferred 4 times. He'd received 2 different contradictory answers. He called me out of exhaustion more than anything else because he needed someone who actually understood what he was dealing with. I helped him. Of course I helped him. Not because I was working for Meridian anymore, but because Robert was a good person dealing with a real problem and I knew how to fix it. But when it was resolved, when the situation was handled, I also told him what Marcus and I were building at Cornerstone and what we could offer in terms of consistent technical support and reliable partnership. 6 weeks after I walked out of Meridian, Marcus and I sat down with representatives from 8 of my former accounts. These weren't meetings I solicited. Every single one of those 8 companies reached out to us first, usually after a specific failure of Meridian had pushed them to the point where they needed to find an alternative. I want to be clear about this because it matters. I never called a single one of Richard's clients to tell them about Cornerstone. I never said a negative word about Meridian in a professional context. I never encouraged anyone to leave. Every conversation that turned into a business relationship started because someone who was frustrated and underserved picked up the phone and found their way to us. But I also won't pretend I didn't know that might happen. I knew what I'd built over 17 years. I knew the weight of those relationships. I knew that when people who'd grown accustomed to a certain standard of service suddenly stopped receiving that standard, they'd start looking. I understood that implicitly. What I didn't anticipate was how fast it would move. By the end of my 2nd month at Cornerstone, we'd signed 5 new major accounts. All of them former Meridian clients. All of them with the same story, variations on the same theme. We tried to make it work, but nobody there knows what they're doing anymore. We kept waiting for things to stabilize, and they just kept getting worse. Kevin, the young engineer who'd held my hand a beat too long on my last day, called me 8 weeks after I left. He looked exhausted, he told me. I could hear it in his voice, even over the phone. Daniel, he said, it's complete chaos. Adrian, Richard, he just keeps asking us to handle things that you used to do, but we don't have your relationships. Distributors won't call us back. Clients ask where you went, and Richard tells us to say you pursued other opportunities. We're all working twice as hard, and half the things we try just fall apart because the people on the other end don't know who we are yet. I felt something when he said that. Something that surprised me, something that ached a little. Because Kevin wasn't a casualty of something I'd done. He was a casualty of something Richard had done, something Richard had set in motion the moment he slid that piece of paper across his glass desk with that smirk. Are you looking at other options? I asked. Everyone is, Kevin said. But Richard's threatening legal action. Non-compete clauses. He's trying to keep everyone scared enough to stay. Legal threats from a man who'd already lost the thing he was trying to protect. That's when I knew Richard was panicking. Not from strength. Not from any kind of strategic position. From the pure animal terror of a person who has just realized that the floor they've been standing on was someone else's back, and that person has now stood up and walked away. Over the following 6 weeks, Marcus and I carefully and properly, working with our legal team to ensure everything was above board, made offers to 4 of Meridian's engineers. All 4 had approached us first. All 4 gave proper notice and were formally released from any valid contractual obligations. All 4 were extraordinarily good at their work and had been, in my quiet professional opinion, wasted in an environment that didn't know what to do with talent. Kevin became our head of technical operations. He's still in that role. He was born for it. And then Summit Automotive made their decision. Their plant manager called me personally. His voice was tired in the way that voices get when someone has been patient for longer than patience should last. Daniel, he said, we've given them 3 months to find their footing. 3 months. And every week something new falls through. We're paying premium rates, and we're getting junior service from people who are learning on the job with our production floor as the classroom. I can't do it anymore. My team can't do it anymore. When Marcus and I signed Summit Automotive, Cornerstone Industrial Partners stopped being a promising startup and became a serious regional force. And the story of what I'd really meant to Meridian stopped being something only I understood. The tipping point, the moment that confirmed everything, came when Thomas Wheeler made the switch. Thomas called Richard directly to explain the decision. I heard about the phone call afterward from Thomas himself, who was half laughing and half genuinely disturbed by what he'd experienced. "Daniel," he said, "that man accused me of being manipulated by a disgruntled former employee. He spent 15 minutes talking about ethics and loyalty, and Thomas paused here, and I could hear him shake his head. Then I asked him a direct question about our equipment configuration. The kind of question any account manager should be able to answer in their sleep. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't answer a basic question about his own client's operation." Thomas said, "He never knew our operation, did he?" "Not really. It was always you." "Yeah," I said. "It was always me." There was a silence between us then that felt big and sad and strangely necessary. Because that was the truth of it. And sometimes truth sounds less like victory than it sounds like loss. 6 months after my last day at Meridian, I walked into the Industrial Equipment Expo, and I saw Richard Harmon across the floor. He looked like a different person. Not older exactly, but diminished somehow, like something inside him had been running at a level that the current situation couldn't sustain, and now it was visibly running low. His collar was a little loose. His eyes moved too fast. There was an energy around him that I recognized as desperation wearing a business casual disguise. He saw me. He crossed the floor. "Will," he said, and then corrected himself. "Daniel, we need to talk." I looked at him. I kept my voice level. "I don't think there's anything for us to discuss," I said. "You destroy my business," he said, and his voice was too loud. Loud enough that the conversation nearby went quiet, that heads turned, that the space between us became something other people started paying attention to. I looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't destroy anything," I said. And then I said the truest thing I knew how to say. I just stopped fixing everything. I watched it land, watched it travel across his face. The moment of comprehension that no amount of MBA theory or acquisition strategy can substitute for. The moment he understood, fully and finally, what he'd actually done. Not just to me, to himself, to the company he'd bought on paper without ever understanding in practice. For 18 months, his most valuable function had been staying out of the way while I made his operation work. When he drove me out with that insulting salary cut, he didn't lose an employee. He lost the only person who'd been translating between his corporate theories and the actual requirements of the real world. The conversations around us had gone quiet. Other industry professionals. People who'd worked with both of us for years. People who understood exactly what had just been said and what it meant and what it represented about the difference between two approaches to building something. I excused myself quietly, rejoined Marcus across the room, and we spent the rest of the expo talking to a potential new partner about our Southeast expansion plans. I heard 8 months later through industry contacts that Richard had been forced to sell what remained of Meridian to a larger firm. The brand name that the founding family had built over 40 years was absorbed and dissolved. Gone. And I want to be careful here. I want to be honest about what I feel when I say that. Because I don't feel triumphant. I feel something sadder than that. Because there were people at Meridian who hadn't done anything wrong, clients who'd been loyal, engineers who'd worked hard, a legacy built by a family before Richard ever showed up, and all of that was collateral damage for one man's miscalculation. I'm not glad about any of that. But I'll tell you what I am, what I became on the other side of everything. And that's where you're going to want to stay with me. 3 months ago, I got a phone call from a corporate headhunter. The investment group that had purchased Meridian's remaining assets was rebuilding. They needed someone to lead the Midwest operation. Someone with relationships across the region. Someone with technical credibility and a proven track record of building client loyalty from the ground up. Someone with my exact background. They offered $340,000 per year. Complete operational authority. Equity participation. The works. They wanted me to go back. To walk into the operation I had built with 17 years of my life, now wearing a different name on the door, and rebuild what Richard Harmon had destroyed. I sat with that offer for a week. I thought about my father, who spent 32 years at the same plant, who believed in loyalty and showing up and doing the work that needed doing. Who taught me that if you take care of people, they'll take care of you. Who never once complained about the weight of a long day, because he understood that the weight was the point. I thought about my daughter Emma. She's 24 now, A structural engineer, sharp and steady in ways that I can only partially take credit for. When I call her to tell her about the salary cut, way back at the beginning of all of this, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, what does it tell you that after 17 years that's how they see you? What does it tell you about what's possible there?" She was 22 when she said that. I thought about the morning I walked into Cornerstone for the first time, and the way Marcus shook my hand, and the way that handshake felt different from every handshake in that other building, because it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine recognition, and the shared belief that doing business the right way and doing business successfully are not competing ambitions. And then I called the headhunter back. "Thank you," I said. "I'm not interested." Not because I didn't feel the pull of it. Not because there wasn't a version of me somewhere underneath everything that wanted to walk back into that territory and prove what I could do with proper authority and recognition. But because I had already learned the lesson that taking that role would ask me to forget. I had spent 17 years of my career making someone else look good while they took credit for what I'd built. I had watched loyalty get mistaken for weakness. I had absorbed the story that if you just kept your head down and delivered results, the recognition would eventually come. It doesn't always come. Some people will take what you give them and decide it means you have nothing worth protecting. The salary cut Richard gave me was supposed to teach me my place. What it actually did was show me what I'd been accepting in place of what I was worth. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because here is what I want you to understand more than anything else, more than the business story, more than the numbers, more than the accounts gained and the company dissolved. The morning Andrew, my son, the one studying engineering who I'd promised would finish school without debt, the morning he graduated, I was sitting in the third row with Emma beside me and my mother beside her, and Marcus 2 seats down because he'd become more than a business partner over these 2 years. He'd become a friend. And Andrew walked across that stage, and I thought about all the 60-hour weeks that had paid for that moment, all the blizzard drives and midnight calls and emergency repairs, and I thought about the fact that every single one of those things had been worth it, but not in the way I'd originally believed. Not because they'd earn me loyalty from a company, but because they'd build in me the kind of person who knew how to build something worth having. Today, Marcus and I run the most successful industrial equipment partnership in 3 states, 41 employees, distribution relationships across 14 states, a client waiting list 4 months deep, an article in Industry Weekly about our model of relationship-centered service that apparently became required reading at 2 business schools, which I find both flattering and a little ironic given everything. Kevin is our head of technical operations, and the 3 other engineers who followed are central to everything we do. The clients who came with me from Meridian have become some of our strongest advocates. Not because I asked them to be, because people remember what it feels like to be genuinely served and genuinely valued. And when they find it, they don't stay quiet about it. We're opening a 4th office next year. Southeast expansion, maybe Texas after that. And last week I heard that Richard Harmon took a job as a regional sales manager at a mid-sized equipment firm. Middle management. Learning, presumably, to actually do the work instead of only supervising it. I don't wish him harm. I genuinely don't. Sometimes the hardest fall is the one that finally shows you where the ground actually is. Sometimes the thing that humbles you is the thing that eventually builds you if you're brave enough to let it. Marcus told me something recently, over coffee in the new office, watching the lake go gray in the early morning. He said, "You know what is rare in this business, Daniel? Somebody who actually means what they say, not as a strategy, not as positioning, just as a way of being in the world." And I thought about my grandfather's watch, with the scratched face and the worn strap. The one my grandmother refused to let him replace because she said it had character. Character meaning, this object has been somewhere. This object has been used. This object has been through something real. I thought about the weight of that watch in my palm on the day Richard slid that paper across his glass desk. Perfect timing, I'd said. I had no idea how right I was. Because the timing wasn't just about the job offer waiting in my inbox, or the partnership that was about to become more than I'd dreamed, or the business I was about to help build from nothing into something real and lasting. The timing was about me, about being at exactly the age and stage where I finally had enough behind me to stop being afraid of what was in front. Your worth is not determined by how other people treat you. It is determined entirely and finally by what you decide you are willing to accept. Don't wait for someone to recognize your value before you start acting like you have it. The market rewards competence and authenticity, even when the person writing your paycheck doesn't. Build something real. Protect it. Treat people the way you want to be treated, not because it's strategy, but because it's right, and because it's the only kind of business that actually lasts. And when someone slides a piece of paper across a glass desk and tells you that 17 years of your life is worth half of what they've been paying you, check your watch and know your timing.